The dust of redemption Gulch tasted of despair. It settled on everything, a fine grit of sorrow coating the sun-bleached wood of the auction platform where three women stood, their futures for sale. They were the widows of Crimson Creek, their husbands lost to a fever that had swept through their homesteads with the speed and finality of a wildfire. Now, everything they had was being sold to the highest bidder, their farms, their homes, their memories. Their names were Eliza, with eyes the color of a stormy sky, her posture a fragile pillar of defiance against the weight of her grief; Maria, whose hands, though calloused from a life of farm work, trembled like a hummingbird's wings as she tried to soothe the youngest; and Sarah, who clutched a worn wooden doll as if it were the last anchor in a drowning world, her small face buried in Maria's dress. In the crowd, a figure stood apart, a lone cowgirl leaning against a hitching post at the edge of the square, a ghost at a feast of sorrow. Her name was Mary, and solitude was her only companion. The high, lonely canyons were her home, the whisper of the wind her only conversation. A past filled with smoke and ash had taught her to keep the world at her arm's length, a lesson burned into her memory. But as she watched the auctioneer, a man with a voice like gravel and greed glittering in his eyes, she felt an old, familiar ache in her chest, a phantom pain that never truly healed. It was the ache of injustice, a feeling she had buried deep beneath years of self-imposed exile. She saw the raw, naked fear in the widow's eyes, a reflection of a terror she knew all too well. She had only come to town for supplies, for salt and flour, for the simple things needed to continue her isolated existence. But fate, it seemed, had a crueler and more complex plan. This was not merely a financial transaction. It was a ritual of public humiliation, a spectacle orchestrated for the town's cruel entertainment and a stark reminder of who held all the power in this godforsaken valley. The air was thick with it, a palpable sense of hopelessness that was as choking as the dust itself. Mary felt the weight of every silent stare, every averted gaze, and knew she could not turn away. The true architect of this misery soon made his presence known, striding through the parted crowd like a wolf through a flock of sheep. Judge Thorne, a man whose name was a curse whispered in the dark corners of the county, stepped forward. He was not a man of the law, but a man who had twisted the law into a weapon for his own enrichment. Dressed in a fine black coat that seemed to suck the very light and warmth from the air, he held a leather-bound ledger in his hand, a symbol of his absolute power. His smile was as cold as a winter wind on a gravestone, a smile that always preceded bad things for good people. He surveyed the crowd, his gaze lingering on the three widows with a possessor's arrogance, as if they were already his property. He cleared his throat, the sound silencing the nervous murmurs of the townspeople, a demonstration of his control. He spoke of debt, of loans defaulted, of the harsh but necessary consequences of failure. His words were smooth, practiced, and coated in a false sympathy that dripped with a poison everyone could taste. The farms belonging to the three widows were prime land, bordering a river he had long coveted. This auction was the final, brutal move in a game of chess he had been playing for months, and he was about to declare checkmate. Mary watched him, her hand instinctively moving closer to the worn grip of the pistol on her hip, a familiar weight that was both a burden and a comfort. She knew his type intimately. Men who built their empires on the ruins of other people's lives. When the bidding began, the offers were pitifully low, insults thrown like stones from Thorne's sycophants in the crowd. Then, a clear voice cut through the tense, suffocating air. $100, Mary said. The crowd turned as one, their eyes wide with a mixture of shock and disbelief. $100 was a fortune to a recluse who lived off the land. Judge Thorne's smile faltered for just a second, then returned, wider and far more menacing. He looked at Mary, this ghost from the canyons, and saw not a threat, but a new fly to be crushed in his web. He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. The lone cowgirl finds her voice. A noble gesture, but a foolish 1 inch he gestured to his right-hand man. 200. The air grew thick with tension, a silence stretched like a held breath, taut and ready to snap. All eyes in Redemption Gulch were on Mary. She had meant to make a statement, to show these women they weren't entirely alone in their despair, to offer a sliver of dignity in the face of their humiliation. She hadn't expected the judge's immediate and aggressive counter, his public effort to crush her gesture before it could inspire any hope. But looking at the three women on that platform, seeing Eliza's defiant glare harden, Maria's quiet terror deepen, and young Sarah's body tremble against her, she knew she couldn't back down. To retreat now would be to personally hand them over to the wolf herself, to become another link in the chain of their oppression. 250, she said, her voice stronger this time, echoing with a hard-won resolve she hadn't felt in years. This was no longer about a simple gesture, it was a battle of wills played out in front of a captive audience of the fearful and the broken. The townsfolk, long cowed and subjugated by Thorne's quiet tyranny, watched with a mixture of deep-seated fear and a dangerous, burgeoning hope. Mary was spending the money she had saved for a new saddle, for winter supplies, for the quiet continuation of her isolated life. It was the price of her solitude, and she was laying it all on the line. But the ghosts of her past were whispering to her now, the ghosts of a husband and child lost to a fire that had taken everything from her. A fire that had been called an accident by a corrupt lawman, but which she knew in her soul was an act of calculated greed, not unlike the one she was witnessing now. That old rage, banked for so long like embers under ash, began to smolder, glowing with a dangerous heat. Judge Thorne's face hardened, his theatrical amusement curdling into raw, undisguised annoyance. 500, he snapped, his voice sharp as a whip crack. He would not be challenged, especially not by a woman with nothing but dust on her boots and a history of sorrow in her eyes. He was making a point for all to see, that he was the absolute power in this valley, and he would utterly crush anyone who dared to forget it for even a second. Mary met his hateful gaze, and for the first time, Thorne saw that her eyes were not just sad, they were as hard and unforgiving as the canyon rock she called home. The bidding war became a brutal spectacle of cruelty, a public flagellation by finance. Each time Mary raised the price, digging deeper into the last of her savings, using the money that was her only shield against a harsh world, Judge Thorne would double it with a contemptuous sneer. He was no longer just trying to acquire the land, he was trying to break her spirit, to humiliate her and make an example of her in front of the entire town. His bids were attacks, each one designed to remind her of her powerlessness. 600, Mary called out, her voice now tight. That was the last of the money she kept for emergencies. Thorne's laugh was loud and mocking. 800, he boomed, enjoying the slow bleed of her resources. The crowd was a silent sea of faces, their expressions a mix of awe and terror. They were witnessing a battle they had never dared to fight themselves. Finally, Mary was down to her last dollar, the coin she kept in her pocket for luck. She had bid everything she had in the entire world. Thorne, sensing his final victory, let a cruel, triumphant smirk play on his lips. It seems the charity of the wilderness has run dry, he jeered, his voice carrying to every corner of the square. He then held up his leather-bound ledger, a prop for his final, devastating performance. His voice boomed with false authority. Let me be perfectly clear why this is happening. It is not just a matter of simple land debt. Their husbands, he said, pointing a dramatic, accusatory finger at the widows, were not only poor farmers, they were fools. They borrowed heavily from me to fund their failing ventures. The debt recorded here, signed and sealed, is $10,000. A collective gasp went through the crowd, a wave of shock and horror. It was an impossible, insurmountable sum, a number designed to crush all hope. The ledger was a death sentence. But just as Thorne was about to slam his gavel down on his own victory, a voice cried out from the platform, raw and full of pain. It was Eliza, the storm-eyed widow. Liar, she screamed, her voice a blade of pure grief and fury. You're a murderer. Our husbands didn't borrow a cent from you. Our farms weren't failing until the river water turned sour. You poisoned our wells. You killed our livestock and then you killed our men when they threatened to expose you to the law. The accusation, sharp and terrible, hung in the silent air, stunning the crowd into absolute stillness. The fight was no longer about land or debt. It was about a monstrous conspiracy, about calculated evil, about cold-blooded murder. The world seemed to stop, balanced on the point of Eliza's accusation. Her words, sharp as shards of glass, had shattered the fragile peace of the day, exposing the rotten truth beneath. Judge Thorne's face, a moment ago so full of arrogant triumph, became a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. His eyes, cold and dark, fixed on Eliza with a look of such malevolence that a shudder of genuine fear went through the crowd. For one single, telling heartbeat, his carefully constructed composure slipped, and everyone in Redemption Gulch saw the monster beneath the fine coat, the predator lurking behind the civilized veneer. He quickly recovered, his lips pulling back from his teeth into a snarl. The slander of a desperate, hysterical woman, he spat, but the denial was weak, his guilt painted across his features for all to see. He slammed the ledger shut with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. The auction is over. The property and all assets, including these 3 ungrateful wretches, now belong to me to settle the outstanding debt. He motioned to 2 brutish men who served as his personal guards, thugs who enforced his will with their fists. Take them. The men, eager and cruel, started towards the platform. The townspeople shuffled their feet, their eyes once again on the ground, their brief flicker of hope brutally extinguished. It was over. The wolf had won. Thorn turned his venomous gaze back to Mary, who stood her ground, her body rigid, her expression unreadable. He decided to twist the knife one last time, to salt the wound of her defeat. "And you," he said, his voice dropping to a low and menacing growl, "you have a choice. Walk away now. Go back to your lonely rocks and your sad, pathetic memories. Or you can stay, fight for these lying women, and I will personally see to it that the fire that took your family looks like a pleasant campfire next to what I will do to you and what is left of your miserable life." The threat was naked, brutal, and chillingly public. A tense, terrible silence fell over Redemption Gulch. The choice was laid bare. What would you do? When faced with pure, unadulterated evil, do you protect your own peace, your own life, or do you risk everything you have for someone else's survival? Tell me in the comments below what choice you would have made in her shoes. And if you believe that one person's courage can truly make a difference, make sure you are subscribed to this channel, because what Mary does next is not just an answer. It is a declaration of war. Mary did not flinch. She did not look away from the abyss of hatred in Judge Thorn's eyes. She simply met his murderous gaze and spoke, her voice impossibly calm and clear, ringing with an authority that stunned him into a momentary silence. "I will pay the debt," she said. The words were impossible, a fool's promise, but she said them with such unshakable conviction that for a moment, everyone in the square believed her. Thorn scoffed, recovering his composure. "With what? The dust in your pockets?" The auction is done. Before he could continue his gloating tirade, another voice joined the fray, cutting through the tension. "She will pay it with this," said a man stepping out from the shadows of the general store. It was Doc Miller, the town physician, his face a roadmap of weary lines from a lifetime of patching up the wounds inflicted by the harshness of the frontier, many of them caused indirectly by Thorn's brand of justice. He held up a heavy leather pouch that clinked with the sound of his entire life savings. "It's not 10,000, but it's a start." A murmur rippled through the townspeople, a sound of disbelief mixed with dawning courage. Doc Miller's defiance was a single spark in a tinderbox of resentment. Then another person stepped forward. It was the blacksmith, a mountain of a man whose arms were as thick as tree trunks and whose face was grim. "Thorn cheated my father out of his land 20 years ago," he boomed, his voice like hammers on an anvil. "He died a broken man. I'll add what I have to see this injustice undone." He threw another heavy pouch onto the small but growing pile at Mary's feet. Suddenly, the dam of fear that had held the town captive for so long began to crack, then shatter. A woman who ran the mercantile, a rancher who had lost grazing rights to Thorn, a young farmhand whose wages had been stolen, one by one, they came forward, adding what little they had. Coins, folded bills, even a wedding ring. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about defiance. It was a rebellion born from one lone cowgirl's refusal to back down. The small pile became a testament to their collective courage, an alliance forged in a moment of shared righteous fury against a common enemy. Judge Thorn watched this unfolding mutiny, his face a thundercloud of disbelief and apoplectic rage. This was not how his victories were supposed to play out. He was losing control, not of the money, but of the fear that was the true currency of his power. The people of Redemption Gulch were no longer looking at the ground. They were looking at him, their eyes filled with a simmering judgment he could not stomach. In a fit of pure fury, he waved his hand dismissively, his voice a roar that barely concealed the panic beneath it. Enough of this pathetic theater. I withdraw the offer of debt settlement. The law is the law, and the debt stands as recorded. He was making up rules as he went, his power exposed as nothing more than brute force. These women are now my property, my indentured servants, until their debt is worked off. And since their husbands are conveniently gone, he added with a vile leer, they will serve me personally at my estate. The insinuation was disgusting and unmistakable. He was taking them not for labor, but for punishment, to break them as he had tried to break Mary. Seize them, he commanded his 2 hired guns, his voice shrill. And if she, he nodded his head toward Mary, his eyes burning with hate, interferes in any way, put her in the ground where she belongs. The 2 men, hardened killers with dead eyes and cruel smiles, grinned and started forward again, their hands moving towards the holsters on their hips. The newly formed alliance of townsfolk took a hesitant, collective step back. Their courage was in coins and words, not yet in bullets. But Mary did not move. She simply took a deliberate step forward, placing herself directly in the path of the approaching men, a silent, solitary barrier between the predators and their prey. Her stance was deceptively relaxed, yet coiled with a dangerous energy like a rattlesnake ready to strike. The lone cowgirl, the ghost from the canyons, was no longer just a reluctant hero. She had become a guardian, a shield for the weak. The square was as quiet as a tomb, the only sound the wind whispering a grim prelude to violence. The standoff stretched for a long, agonizing moment, a tableau of good versus evil. The 2 hired guns slowed their approach, their brutish confidence faltering as they sensed something different about this woman. It wasn't the wild-eyed fear of a cornered animal they were used to seeing, but the placid, unnerving calm of a true predator. Last chance, one of them rasped, his hand hovering over the butt of his gun. Step aside, little lady. And Mary's reply was not a word, but a movement. It was a blur, a whisper of motion so fast and fluid it seemed to defy the eye. Before the men could even clear leather, her own pistol was in her hand, the barrel leveled and steady as a rock. The fire that had claimed her family had also forged her in its flames. In the lonely, bitter years that followed, she hadn't just hidden from the world, she had trained, turning her bottomless grief into a razor-sharp skill, vowing that no one would ever have that kind of power over her or anyone else ever again if she could help it. A loud clang and a cry of pain rang out, but it wasn't from Mary's gun. The blacksmith, seeing his moment, had thrown a heavy hammer with incredible accuracy, striking one of the thugs squarely in the shoulder and causing his gun to fire harmlessly into the sky. The sudden chaos was the opening Mary needed. 2 precise shots echoed across the square in quick succession. They were not kill shots, but they were surgically disabling. One of the hired guns cried out, clutching a shattered wrist. The other crumpled to the ground, his leg buckling beneath him from a perfectly placed shot to the knee. It was over in seconds. Judge Thorne stood frozen, his jaw hanging open, his face a mask of utter, complete shock. His entire empire of power, built on intimidation and the threat of violence, had evaporated in the face of real, decisive action. He turned to flee like the coward he was, but found his path blocked by the blacksmith and Doc Miller, their faces set like stone. The town had found its courage. The reign of Judge Thorne was well and truly over. Months passed, and the harsh, unforgiving sun of the frontier gave way to the softer, golden light of a hopeful autumn. Mary's ranch, once a lonely monument to solitude and sorrow, was now a bustling, thriving sanctuary. The oppressive silence had been replaced by the cheerful sounds of hammers, the lowing of healthy cattle, and the sound that had been absent from Mary's life for so long, the easy, genuine laughter of women who had found their strength again. Eliza, Maria, and Sarah were not dependents, they were partners, pillars of this new community. Eliza, with her fierce spirit and sharp mind, had taken over the farm's accounts, proving to be a shrewd and brilliant strategist who turned their collective funds into a prosperous enterprise. Maria, whose hands had once trembled with fear, discovered a miraculous gift for healing animals and tending the earth. The gardens bloomed under her gentle care, providing for them all. And young Sarah, her worn wooden doll now resting peacefully on a shelf, ran through the fields with a joy that was infectious, her delighted laughter the sweetest sound Mary had ever heard. Together, they had taken the money donated by the brave townsfolk and, under Eliza's brilliant guidance, invested it, legally and officially buying back their own land from the now deposed and imprisoned Judge Thorne at a state auction. They had combined their properties with Mary's, forming a cooperative, a fortress of community and shared purpose that was the talk of the county. Mary, the woman who had fled from all human connection, had found it in the most unexpected and beautiful way. She was no longer a ghost haunted by the past. She was the heart of a new family, a family forged not by blood, but by courage, resilience, and shared survival. The moral of their story was etched into the very soil of the valley they had reclaimed, that true strength is not found in isolation, but in the powerful bonds we forge with others. It was a living testament that one person's courage, no matter how reluctant, can ignite a fire in the hearts of many, and that redemption is not about forgetting the past, but about building a better, stronger future from its ashes. Mary's story is a powerful reminder that the safest path is not always the right one. She could have stayed in her canyon, safe and alone in her solitude, but she chose to step into the fire for strangers. She chose connection over comfort, justice over peace, and in doing so, she not only saved 3 lives but also her own soul from the prison of her past. Every day, we are faced with our own versions of this choice, in ways both big and small. We see injustice, we see cruelty, and we have to decide whether to turn away or to stand up and speak out. If her story has inspired you, if you believe in the power of courage and the strength of community, then subscribe to our channel right now. Become a part of a family that celebrates these stories and believes in the unwavering strength of the human spirit. Your subscription is more than just a click, it tells us that these are the tales you want to hear, the values you want to see celebrated. And your journey with us doesn't have to end here. A new story is waiting for you right now, a story that is even more powerful and dramatic. What happens when a disgraced lawman, cast out from the very town he swore to protect, is the only one who can save it from a new, even deadlier threat that comes from within? To find out, click on the video that you see on your screen right now. Don't wait. The next adventure is ready to begin, and we promise you will not want to miss a single second of it. Click now, and let's continue the story together.